Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast. I'm Matthew Byrne, your host, and this is another episode in our series on the AV Advisor special episodes. Before we get started, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to get access to further episodes, do us a favor. It really helps us out if you click that subscribe button on whatever platform you are listening to right now. Please leave us a rating if you'd like to share some feedback with us. And if you're interested in sort of deeper dive content based on some of the things we talk about on the podcast, it would be really great if you could go over to productionvaluematters.com and subscribe to our newsletter and get access to more rich content about event production. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the output of events, how what we should be measuring, what outputs we should be expecting to create, and how to tell if you are doing them right. So let's first talk about math. Math is an amazing thing. I say this to my teams all the time about, math is great because 2 plus 4 equals 6, but so does 18 minus 12. I mean, we often focus on how we get the result, the 2 plus 4, rather than the result, which is the 6. Einstein's big thing was that he found an equation that finally explained the result we were all seeing in the universe. His E equals mc squared equation finally highlighted how we get to a certain observation or result that we are seeing in the universe. We start to overemphasize the equation, though, thinking that the formula produces a result, when in fact, what Einstein did was focus on the result and build the equation that led to it best. What is even more amazing about that equation is that it also said that it would result in other things that we had not seen yet. Interesting results, which eventually came true, like the existence of black holes and gravitational waves, which I always thought was pretty cool. The issue that we sometimes come to in the event production world, and we see this a lot in clients and in partners, is that we start to concentrate too much on 2 plus 4. We have always done 2 plus 4, and it has equaled 6. By changing the emphasis from the equation to the result, which is the 6, we realize that 18 minus 12 equals 6, or 36 divided by 6 may equal 6, equals 6 as well. And so what we need to emphasize is, what are we trying to get out of this equation or out of this effort? And I think it breaks into 4 general areas. The first being sentiment, then data, business objectives, and content. And if you're thinking about it as I say this, you start to realize that they all sort of mesh into each other, and there are reasons for that. But on today's episode, I'm really just going to go through those 4 main output buckets and say why it's really important and how to measure it, and how we can evaluate it, and how we can start to build plans around creating those outputs. The other thing I'll say is that I think this applies to almost every single type of event, whether or not it's a B2B, B2C, entertainment, or even a social event. These outputs are really, really common across all of those different things that we sort of bucket into a larger sort of events world. Let's just think of a wedding as an example. A wedding has an output of sentiment. You want people to like your new partner and the new family that you're about to create in the joining of 2 people. You are trying to get data out of that event. You want to know who attended. You want to know who you have to send thank you cards to. There are business objectives in a wedding, right? You want to stay under budget, or depending on who you're deciding to join your life with, maybe you want to blow that budget, and that's not as important as an output, but it still is an output that you're looking for. And of course, you want content out of your wedding. You want nice pictures, a cool video. You want to have shareable things that you can send to all your relatives. So these 4 things still apply. They apply to things on the larger scale entertainment. If we were to sort of pick on Taylor Swift's Eras tour from 2024. Yeah, there was a huge sentiment output that they were doing from that concert tour. They really wanted everybody to love Taylor Swift and love the team, and have the team be in love with being on that tour. Tales of Taylor Swift spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to bonus all of her team while they were on tour, knowing that that would lead to increased sentiment. They certainly had business objectives. They wanted to sell more merch, sell more tickets, sell more albums, add people to communities where they could, again, boost sentiment, but also generate new forms of revenue. The data output from that was certainly robust. They were able, through the building of communities and ticket sales and metrics across the tour of North America, they were able to capture robust data about their fan base and how to drive more sentiment, and which then drives more business. And of course, with somebody like Taylor Swift, there is tons of content that they were outputting, whether or not that's social media content or a feature film that was aired on Disney Plus. The content that they can get out of that tour will last Taylor Swift and her team for decades to come. Now, I don't think you should judge your B2B exhibit or sales meeting or all hands town hall to the same level of that. But you do have to concentrate on those four big buckets, being sentiment, data, business objectives, and content. So let's go through all four and just say, what are we really trying to get? Like when I say sentiment as a output, what are we trying to say is the actual output? Like what is the tangible thing and the result that we're looking for? In my mind, that's things like NPS scores. That is audience feedback and growth, brand awareness, and other things where you can measure the traction of how people feel about your brand, about your team, and about your product as you go to market. Data comes in the form of metrics and KPIs, or key performance indicators. It also gives you a lot of attribution data, which you can then attribute to your particular audience. You can learn so much about your audience by just simply capturing and measuring the data that is output from your event. As I said, some of that is attendee numbers, like how many people came, how many people didn't come, how many people spent so much time at a booth or in a session. All of these things are rich forms of output data that you can then add to your output matrix, which is absolutely. Then we have real business objectives, and those come in the form of things like leads and lead capture, increased revenue and additional new sales, or growth of existing clients, all of those sort of revenue and marketing metrics, but also things like employee retention. An output of a really good training, incentive, or town hall, for instance, is about how much of our employee talent base are we retaining and how much of that talent base are we growing, which sort of goes into a sentiment metric as well, but it really is a business objective of that particular event. And then finally, content. So this is the video, the audio, the white paper or studies or reports that you're going to create based on what happens at your events. Long form and short form content from, a highlight reel in the short form of, or a sizzle reel, or what we always used to call a happy snaps video, which is a perfect way of capturing content as an output of your event. But also things like long form, like you paid the $1 million to have some celebrity come and speak at your event. Well, this is content that you can then leverage and is a key output that you should be looking at all of your events. So let's go through some of the things that you should be asking about the different outputs and to measure how successful they are. So in sentiment, quite simply, what is your NPS or Net Promoter Score? If you're unfamiliar with Net Promoter Score, there's a mathematical formula that says, everything below 0 to 7 rating is considered a detractor. So if they give your event a rating of 6, they're not really going to promote your event. They're not going to recommend that to other people. If you're if you're 7 or 8, you are most likely considered neutral. Like you liked it, it was good, but if somebody asked you to do, you probably wouldn't have an opinion. You'd probably shrug and say, yeah, it was all right. But if you rate something at a 9 or a 10, then you are considered a promoter. So what you want to do is you want to take the combination of your detractors and your neutrals, and you want to take your promoters and divide it by that number. And that will give you a Net Promoter Score. So out of 100 people, 50% of the people are promoters and 50% are a detractor or neutral. So your Net Promoter Score will essentially be 50 divided by 50, which equals 1. And so anything 1 and above is a net positive promoter score. So it's actually 1 to 50 is usually you're doing okay. You could definitely improve. 50 and above means, oh my God, everybody loves your thing and they want to tell everybody about it. 0 to negative 100 means you need to change a lot of things because nobody likes what you're doing. So moving on from that, social metrics like shares, follows, engagement, is it that increasing? Is it staying the same? Is it decreasing? Those are a way to measure sentiment outputs from your events on social media. Has attendance gone up or down or stayed the same? Measuring those, and again, they all kind of bleed into each other a little bit, but measuring the data that as your output will tell you some of the sentiment outputs that you are creating. What was the average consumption of your session? How much time are people engaging and spending time at exhibit spaces? This will tell you how much people are engaged and how much they want to know more about that. And then, a good one to ask is always, what percentage of your attendees year over year are actually repeat attendees? And here's a tricky thing about interpreting this piece of data, that one would say, hey, it's great that every year 100% of our our attendees are coming back every single year. That's actually a bit of a dangerous metric because now you're not growing sentiment. You're not creating more sentiment as an output out of your event. You're essentially maintaining. Everybody who likes it has always liked it and will continue to like it. So you're not actually creating more sentiment output with that. What you're doing is you're staying very neutral. Let's move on to content and things that you should be looking for and how to measure that for your events. Again, as I had mentioned at the beginning of this section, that content can take the forms of audio, video, white papers, reports, guides, all sorts of things that are born out of what you were talking about and what you were launching at that event. So it can take any one of those forms, but you need to ask yourself, well, first of all, are you recording audio and video? And for more than just archival purposes. So, and I mean, in archival purposes, I mean, are you sticking a camera at the back of the room and just recording like a big wide shot? If that's the case, then yes, you are technically pushing out some content or at least capturing content as part of the outputs of your events, but you're not doing it any service. It's sort of like the same thing of like, yes, we have 100% retention over our audience year over year, but it's not growing. So that means that we're not leveraging sentiment as an output of this event. And if we're just doing archival recordings, I believe that you're not actually creating any content as an output. Essentially, what you're doing is functionally recording it. So then you have to ask yourself, so where are we publishing that video and audio content or those things or those white papers or guides? Is it internally only? Is it on just a single platform? Are we going to multiple platforms? Do you use any lead capture or gates for your video rich content like video and audio? Are you monetizing it? Is any of those metrics actually increasing or decreasing? So let's say you have the celebrity that you spent $1.5 million to produce the inspirational opening session with, and you do capture it for more than archival purposes, is as an output of your event, which then ties to the outputs of revenue, lead generation, employee retention, what those business objectives. Are you putting it behind a place where you can generate more revenue and then count that as an additional knock-on output from your content output efforts? And so, how would you rate the production quality on that content? And you've got to be really honest with yourself. I was with a client a couple of months ago. We were chatting about them wanting to switch to us. It was very flattering. They were interested in us pitching something, and they sent me their video capture or the output, which was a bunch of promotional videos and session recordings that they would then put behind a membership portal so that they could encourage people to become members to get to this rich content. And the quality was, we were very frank with this client. It was terrible. It was framed badly. The lighting was terrible. The mic, they didn't use professional audio equipment. And so it was hard to hear. And, the person was off to the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And it was not the highest production quality. So as you measure that output of your events, the same way that you want quality leads that are pre-qualified and, from a business and development and sales process and return on investment that you want to get out of that, you want them to be high quality. I think sometimes in this industry, we say, well, we recorded it and we can see basically the person is a really badly framed shot, but at least we did it. And we're the only people who have that person speaking on camera. So that adds value. That value greatly diminishes without high production quality. So what I will say is that you need to rate your post-event content and its production quality. And then a really specific metric or KPI that you can look at for your content output has the number of downloads of any of your post-event materials, whether it's video, audio, or white papers, etc. Has it increased, stayed the same, decreased? Might not be applicable because you're not doing this. Obviously, if it's increasing, that means the output of your events is improving. The content output of your events is improving because people want access. And so they are coming to, and the demand is increasing. If it stayed about the same, that is a key indicator that there could be an opportunity to grow that content output. And if it's decreasing, that's because what you're putting out there as an output is not good enough. And the audience and your potential target market is just screaming at you, please do better. Data as an output. So the first thing we need to talk about is, do you capture data points from your event? And that can be anything from registration numbers, attendee numbers, traffic patterns and heat maps, session dwell time, NPS scores. Although a sentiment output is something you can pull the data. There are rich sources of data for that at your event. Full disclosure, this isn't an advertisement, but Zenus, which is the company that Nick Borelli works for, he's one of our panelists that shows up on the podcast once a month. They start to take rich ways of capturing sentiment data through their proprietary technology that allows you to really understand down to the session who liked what was being said on stage, who didn't like it, what their body language said, and it's all metadata, so it's not very specific. It's not very Big Brother, but it's an interesting piece of technology, which I encourage you to check out as a way as another avenue of data capture. especially in the events industry or the events market, we have been emphasizing this for a few years. The entire market has been looking for new ways to capture data in meaningful, non-intrusive, but rich ways. And I think as a professional who works in this market, we always have to be looking at those potential areas for data output from our events. So, what sources of data are you using to collect that data output? Is it simply registration data, which again, there's ways to capture that very easily and very robustly at the beginning of a registration process? Is it through post event surveys? Is it direct feedback? I'm not sure a lot of people understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative data. I used to work in market research very, very, very many years ago. But that's essentially the two big pools. Is it's either quantitative, meaning of greater quantity. So surveys, post-event surveys are a perfect example of quantitative data. So I send out 1 million surveys, I get 900,000 back, and we analyze the answers that they gave us on a high quantity volume, and that gives us some visualization of that data. Direct feedback or qualitative data is, why don't you interview your key stakeholders? Let 10 of them and just ask them for 35 minutes to an hour about what they felt, what they saw, get anecdotal data. This is amazing, rich source of data that leveraged correctly will really measure that output. It will help you measure the specific outputs in sentiment, business objectives, and content, but data being its own sort of bucket of event output, using qualitative data instead of just quantitative data will allow you to get a richer picture and understand what that quantitative data is showing you. The other place you can look for really interesting data points is social media. So comments, direct engagements, engagement metrics, sharing metrics, all of these KPIs and metrics that are intrinsic in that sort of digital marketing universe, whether that's through social media or online data capture, will give you an amazing direct output. And from events, that tends to be in social media. You may not be able to find, their browsing data while they were at the event. Although I'm sure that there's a piece of technology out there that will gate people's phones on the exhibit show floor. But in reality, the best way for most people in the events world to be able to measure social media KPIs and metrics is the best way to get that data out. So then in the business outputs objectives, like, do you attribute event data to specific KPIs and outcomes at your business? Is that about new leads being captured or meetings being booked? Obviously, sales and revenue. If your event is an exhibit, new lead, quality lead scoring, sales attribution, revenue numbers quarter over quarter or year over year are objectives that we should be looking at as the business output of our event investment. You can start to measure direct revenue of that event itself, and that takes the form of tickets, sponsorship, exhibit sales. Have they increased, stayed about the same, or decreased? Those are great ways to measure direct business objectives from that specific event. Now, not every one of the events that certainly that we produce or the market produces are meant to be like a Taylor Swift concert, a ticket revenue generator. Certainly there are, whether it's B2B or B2C events that are modeled that way, especially in internal business events, whether that's a sales kickoff or a incentive program or whatever it might be. They don't rely on those sort of direct revenue metrics, but measuring the revenue attributed or the year over year increase or decrease or stagnation of that particular KPI or metric is an important output of events. How are you measuring the the leads, the revenue, and the potential deals out of that event? Is it on a scale of excellent to poor? How are you measuring that, and putting that sort of measure metric in place allows you to ensure that you're hitting some of the business output objectives of that. And then we can go into specific business metrics or business outputs like, money saved, how's your budget doing? Is it increasing, staying the same, or decreasing? And then I'm going to really harp on the one of the bigger business outputs of events that we don't really talk about a lot because, especially if we're more concentrated on marketing and live events being part of that marketing mix, it's also part of employee retention and employee training. So this is where I say that, that whether or not it's a wedding or it's a B2B event or a concert tour, all events need these 4 buckets of outputs. And especially if you're in HR or if you're in talent development or in team leadership within an organization, then yeah, you're looking for sentiment. You're looking for employees to love the company and want to be there and contribute their best efforts. You are looking for business objectives. You want them to get more sales, but you also want them to stick around and be worth the investment that you're putting into them on the long term. You want to be able to get content out of that, which is, we put together a training thing because we want to tell people about this really great idea about how we're going to be the best sales team in the universe. Well, you want to output training videos and recordings of those sessions so that that becomes a resource available to your team so that they can actually take the lessons that you were trying to give them or the inspiration you were trying to give them and use that to propel your objectives throughout the year. And then, of course, data, as I said, you can measure how much people came to each session, how much time they spent talking with their colleagues afterwards. All of these little bits of data are important. But the real bucket here in the business objective is that employee retention and growth. I know that in the world of business, it is sometimes perceived value, and this is not to the organization, this is actually to the shareholders, that, hey, if we cut 15% of our workforce, we're actually making it more efficient and, all of those things. I, as an amateur economist, I don't necessarily believe that that is actually a good metric. All that tells me is that the people who have shares are actually just going to be a little bit richer. It doesn't mean anything good about the business. But if the company is growing in a realistic way with enthusiastic and bought in employees and team members, that is an output that I would see as a great indicator of a company's health and growth potential. And so certainly those kind of events are the things that can be measured as a business output. So when thinking about your events, again, don't concentrate on the formula, but concentrate on the result. So it's not about 2 + 4 = 6. It's about 6. How do we get to 6? Here are the outputs that we want. We want this much growth in sentiment. We want this kind of rich data. We want to have these business objectives, and we're going to generate this cool content. And so if you concentrate on the 6, then you will grow your ability to measure and build the right formula that gets you to that business result. And again, those are sentiment, data, business, and content outputs. If you want to learn more about how to set yourself up with the right formula to get the business, data, content, and sentiment outputs you want from your events, you can always go over to productionvaluematters.com and subscribe there. And in the coming months, we're actually going to be expanding on this subject and sending out some interesting guidelines and tools that you can use to measure the output of your events. That's it for now. I'm Matthew Byrne, host of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Please hit subscribe and leave us a rating on any platform you're listening to us today, and we will see you next week. Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast, is brought to you by Burn Production Services. To learn more about Burn Production Services and how we can achieve your business goals with meaningful event designs and elevated production value, head over to burnproductionservices.com. Thanks for listening.